taking a particularly practical approach to the question of Africa.
As I traveled more throughout Africa and just around, I continued to meet more and more people who were like me, into the arts, super creative. And I was like, wow, I'm meeting all these amazing people who are African and doing all these interesting things. And then when I would tell my other friends, they would be like, wow, this is all happening. And then I started to find, like, maybe in the last year or so, like, it was more like this critical mass, more and more and more, and like between Twitter and different things that are out there, it felt like an explosion. So I started to like do talks and do different things to just really just share, being able to share this content and let other people know, like, hey, there's this whole other thing happening that we're kind of not tapped into. So that was kind of the inspiration to do this talk here, being able to show how like new media is really reframing how Africa is seen, because I think there's like this general dialogue. Often you look at the news and mainstream media and it tends to focus on the challenges that take place on the continent instead of like all these triumphs, like, tech communities, fashion designers, filmmakers, like just this explosion of creativity. And new media is the perfect platform to share that. So that's kind of how this talk came about. And so we're going to get into it and how that Jepchumba introduces.
Hi everyone, and this is actually a conversation, so
yes.
Hopefully we'll get to hear some of your voices and it's not just going to be us yammering. But my name is Jepchumba and I run a site called African Digital Art. And I did my master's in digital media, and at the time I wanted to focus my studies on something that represented where I came from, which is Kenya. And so when I was doing my master's degree, I went online to do research, and I wanted to focus on African animators and animation. And anything that I would look up would say there's actually no real digital media industry in Africa. There's no really creative outlet, and most of the images were from people outside of Africa coming in to take pictures and to expose what Africa was. And I knew that this was absolutely not the case. I knew that there were artists, I knew that there were filmmakers, I knew that there were animators all across Africa that were showing their creativity in a unique way. So I decided if I can't really find African digital media, I might as well make a space for it online. So I created what is AfricanDigitalArt.com. And it features artists from over 30 countries plus. And we also have a vibrant online community where you can post your profile, you can show kind of the things that you're involved with, kind of projects, and also communicate with other African artists that are doing interesting things. So African Digital Art has kind of become this creative house, an online community that provides creatives from the continent and also people who are interested to participate online. And also now we're starting to do events, and we're starting to get more active with people on the continent and traveling to different parts of Africa, interviewing the artists and seeing what are the things that they're doing to participate with new media. So that's a little bit background about me, and we wanted to also kind of get a feel of you guys, your exposure to African media and Africa in general. And so I think she has like a couple of questions I wanted to just to feel out so we can kind of start the conversation going and hopefully get some great discussion on the way. So yeah.
So the point is, like, just being able to, like, as Jepchumba said, to use the media that's being created to tell a new story. And I mean, that's the idea, that's the perspective that I kind of see it happening. Like, these stories are being told and giving us an alternative ideas and alternative perspectives as to what's happening in the continent, just for Africans throughout the diaspora, what are they creating. So I guess just to get a feel of the people in the room, are you familiar, like, are you visiting blogs where the content is like focused on, Africa? Like, what are your, by show of hands, like, do you regularly like kind of visit African blogs? Are you familiar with African creatives?
So there's yes, maybes and some no's.
Okay, cool. So,
For the people who aren't so familiar, like if you would feel comfortable like sharing us, like what are the kind of typical representations that you, what are some of the scripts, like what do you visually see when it comes to Africa? Like how would you describe Africa visually when you come across it?
Sometimes the media over here, it's more nature than it is people. So kind of they want you to be spellbound by all of the diverse plant life and animal life more than the diverse population of people and that kind of thing.
and I definitely think that's true. I know, like for myself, like I guess like with my friends, I have this ongoing joke, like when we're like, oh, so what are you gonna do in Africa? And we're like, go on a safari, because that's what happens. That's what you do when you go there. And I think, you know, a lot of what you kind of see is like, oh, there's these beautiful landscapes and it's great. And most people, when they go to Africa, like the general, like when you think of tourism on the continent, it is related to safaris and game parks. But I think what's really interesting is when you take the time to go there, you discover, just like anywhere, like you can be right here in Austin and you discover communities of people doing interesting things. So just a summer ago, when I was home in Nigeria, like I was discovering like art galleries and art houses and meeting people who were like really super creative. And I was in Dakar a year ago, and there were like all these artist communities and like film houses and bed and breakfasts, and it was totally something you wouldn't even, most people would not associate when they think about Africa. So it's this idea of it being very cosmopolitan, and I don't think that people generally think about that. Even now, like the whole term, there's like a term called like Afropolitan, and some people, it's like identifying yourself like being African within this contemporary 21st century context. And they're like visuals that kind of go along with that. So definitely think.
Anybody else?
Should we kind of like those stereotypical images that we
Not necessarily. It doesn't. I mean, doesn't necessarily have to be stereotypical. It's mainly just your exposure that you've seen of how Africa is represented.
And it could just be something like, you know, I find that I see a lot of this, and I'm not, you know, like I'm not really sure.
So I'm trying to remember, because I had been on your site, so I'm trying to think like before that.
Okay, so
but I guess a lot of like self-taught is maybe how I pictured it. You know, very sort of like self-taught paintings and things like that, just sort of like very crafted and handmade.
So what was your initial impressions before? Do you remember?
I think that's what they need. I think that
Before it was more
yeah.
self-taught artists
Yes.
doing paintings and sculpture and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's the whole idea of, I think it's kind of, it's an indigenous community, so like they're using, you know, we use the tools that are kind of around us, so maybe there's not a lot of maybe education or higher education to be kind of influenced by other things. But I think, because we were talking a little bit earlier about the idea like there are a lot of resources that you're not accessible to because of where you are, but then it allows you to become very creative in how you accomplish your goals. So I think that kind of being without maybe certain skill sets for resources lends itself to this kind of innovation and ingenuity that does not take place, you know, anywhere else. And we'll talk like about specific examples of that later.
So we wanted to talk about, this is an image that we showcased artists, and something that represents something that's new for us, like something that's important for us, and we feel as though today Africa is experiencing what we would like to call an African Renaissance, where you have a combination of creativity, of global culture, and technology. So now with new media forms, with people who have the opportunity to be on Facebook, for example, my 86-year-old grandmother friends me from her village, and she, you know, she comments on my pictures, she tells me that I should behave myself, like things like that, have kind of influenced what people typically think of Africa. Those are certain things about Africa being somehow stuck in this traditional archaic place where it's nothing but safaris, and they're not really metropolitan areas, and not many people would know who Lady Gaga is. But we're finding now that with this kind of hot, like this kind of culture or pot of technology fused with connecting people who are in New York, people who are in, for example, in Dakar, we're seeing this sort of new African renaissance. And actually would like to point out that during South by Southwest is going to be a massive African showcase of African artists who are using digital forms to not only promote their work, but also to produce music with digital technology. And I think that's like one of the things that has been the thing that has changed the way we view Africa and the way we understand what it is today. I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, I think exactly, like, there's definitely like a renaissance that's taking place that you find, and not necessarily, to say renaissance, sometimes I think people are like, oh my God, it's just happening, like before these last 2 years, like nothing is going on. And it's not really true, but I think because of new media and just all the different technologies out there, people are coming across the information much more rapidly, so it feels like this critical mass, like, oh my God, everything's happening now. But that wasn't, that's not necessarily the case. Like, people have been creating within a 21st century context for, as long as we've been in the 21st century. So just to, kind of like state that. But like, Jepchumba was saying, using like digital media, whether it's artists who are making music, you'll have one artist. Like during the music portion, there are going to be like a ton of different artists coming from Africa to perform here, and here at South by Southwest. And a lot of them have worked with each other, have never met each other, but they're in South Africa, they're sending their files digitally to Nairobi, and then artists are laying tracks or laying music or laying vocals on top of it, and then sending the file back. And these people have never met. And that's not just one case. I think a lot of artists are collaborating across country borders and creating everything from music to film, and it's so much more easier to do that now because of the technologies that are out there. So it's almost like everything that we're doing here, the reality is it's happening, right in Africa as well. So it's like, so what I'm looking for, it's like it's a level playing field. It's kind of democratizing the process. Like, we all have the same tools. We all can access the internet, whether it's from our mobile phone or from an actual laptop. So I think it's creating a lot of opportunity, and great things are the byproduct of it.
So we wanted to touch on the mobile revolution, because that's basically the way people in Africa generally experience the internet for the first time. And it's really hard to say in Africa, because Africa is quite large and diverse, and people have different relationships with the internet, with internet use. But one thing for sure is that the mobile revolution has led people from outside of Africa to start asking, what exactly is African digital content? What does it look like, and who do we find to actually put? We have a new Samsung phone. We want to launch this in Kenya, but what kind of content will go on here? So because of just the influx of technology and the mobile revolution, we're seeing people gravitating to represent their lives and their culture through their mobile devices. A great example of this was a person who was journeying, I forgot his name, he was journeying through Western Africa, and he found that people were sending each other songs through Bluetooth. And then he was able to kind of put it together and produce a CD. So you have different ways that mobile technology is really changing the way that creatives think about what kind of mediums they have available to them. And one thing that I can say just from curating African digital art is that technology has a way of cutting across barriers of resources and also barriers of language and also that digital divide, because people are not afforded kind of the equipment that you would find typical artists and creatives have. So one of the great examples that I love using is Just a Band is a great group from Kenya, and they have an amazing album, digital album. But
So
if
what are they
you
called?
Just a Band, I'm actually going to be performing South by Southwest. They're an incredible band, and you should see the equipment that they use. People in Africa have this don't have, the brand new iMac, or they don't necessarily have the latest Canons, but they still find ways to produce content that measures up to somebody who has $1 million budget and has a cameo with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and all those things. So we wanted to kind of lead a conversation about what do you think do you think that having access to technology actually helps people to be creative, or do you think that the limitations are the things that create these great environments for people to think outside of the box and also think about ways to create something that might be new and new ways of us understanding exactly how to use our mobile devices and how to use our computers? So I think maybe I can open that up discussion, or you can, if anyone has any thoughts on that, yeah.
Well, I think creativity has always come within the context of whatever your limitations are anyway. So even, with the beginning of hip hop, it had a lot to do with not having access to a lot of tools that other artists might have had at the time. So you create with what you have. And whether you're a painter or, visual artist or musical artist or a literary artist, it starts with the inspiration and the imagination. And then once you're trying to create some tangible output of that, you start with whatever you have in your mind. But the access to more sophisticated tools impacts your art. For example, if you're in Kenya, in Nairobi, the iHub has 5G connectivity. So if you're trying to do something in the streaming realm and you're in Eastleigh or some other part of Nairobi, you're going to encounter different obstacles. So definitely the access to the tools of technology, which, as you say, the telephone penetration has really expanded, the opportunity for people to do things with mobile, and as you said, people are accessing the internet for the first time, primarily being mobile. So as those tools proliferate, I think you'll see an explosion of creativity.
And one of the things that also, when I had a chance to travel to Africa and meet some of the people that I featured on my site, and going into their studio, they have to experience things like power cuts, where they don't, the electricity just goes for days and have a project due and a deadline, and those are some of the things that people, in like the United States don't have to think about whether their power is going to be there tomorrow, or whether they're going to have access to the internet, or how they're going to get their albums out. But it's like exactly what you said, how creativity, limitations of breeding ground for creativity. Anybody else have something to say?
Just something. I'm from Montreal in Canada, so I know mostly the west side of the African continent. And one thing I found while traveling there really fascinating is you mentioned the word ingenuity. And of course, when you are a creative person, you need tools to actually perform your art or whatever the creation you put forward. And that's what I found really fascinating in Africa, is because you're not having the same kind of tools and everything, you have to go to different paths. And those paths bring out a true creativity. While here people, and you can pretty much see that in South by Southwest, are pretty equipped with the same equipment. So usually it formats things, which when you're in Africa or in South America, you see people pushing forward because of that constraint of not having all the same tools. So that's what I find really fascinating about what's happening down there.
So I think one of the people I was talking to earlier said something that was really important. And my answer is yes, technology is really necessary because of the most important thing it does is connect. And connection is where creativity comes from. But I really think that there is, I get what you're saying about this danger that will saturate this place with the most advanced technology, and it becomes a crutch rather than a stepping stone to even greater creativity. And the distinction that he made was between constraint and resourcefulness, right? And that both of those things need to coexist and leverage each other in order to create a virtual space for creativity. So constraint being you don't have enough resources, right? You have a limited set of resources, and you have to figure out the best way to use what you have right now to blow everybody's mind. And that's where you have, an old computer, and you make music that's as advanced as what everybody has in the West. And then the flip side of that is now resourcefulness, where you have access to those resources, but instead of using it as a crutch to produce at the same level, your question is, how can I most efficiently use what I've now is now been made available to me to step up my game, right? And so, because the definition of technology is so fluid, right? An 8-track recorder was advanced technology a couple years ago, and it's getting even worse now. What's technology now is going to be, people laugh at you now if you have a CD Discman. And I remember getting a Discman and thinking I was in the future, And so, yes, and so they definitely need to coexist, but I think the distinction needs to be made and to leverage both parts.
I definitely agree, because I think with videos, from Nigeria, so there's this whole film industry, Hollywood, and it's huge, third largest film industry in the world. And the equipment, maybe 3 years ago, the equipment was very the basics and things that people in the West would probably just be like, that's not even a camera, nobody uses that. But then now, the ease of which, some filmmakers can get a Canon, and then what they're doing now is you're like, whoa, you see the difference. So I think once some people do get access to the tools, it does kind of take their creativity, their artistry, whatever they're creating, to a whole different level. So I think, yes, we're very scrappy and we'll work with what we have, but we've put in all that sweat equity and know how to really work these tools that are very low tech. When we come across these high tech tools, it's we just go in and create great stuff. So I think that's really cool. And then another thing I wanted to mention was the whole speaking of kind of the collaboration and the kind of creativity in numbers. I think what's also interesting in Africa is the sheer number of people. So when a town or an area gets broadband, all of a sudden it's there are a million. There are all these people who now have access to the internet via their mobile phones, and now there's so much connectivity and collaboration, and it happens so quickly. Whereas it wouldn't be the same here in the West. So I think those sheer numbers and more people now are having mobile phones. Africa is more than India or Asia in terms of mobile phones and the amount of users. It's over 700 million. So I just think that is also going to be a very interesting factor going forward in how people are getting content and receiving and distributing their own content.
So yeah, just to go back to what she says, now we're seeing that the African creative economy is growing at an alarming rate, and it's actually going to triple in size. And And this is also a piece that was done by an artist that we featured that just kind of shows that explosion of technology and people trying to catch up to it, and also show how they can use their own personality and their own experiences to portray exactly what's going on. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about too was how this kind of explosion of African digital media has led to artists now being able to express themselves about the kind of struggles and the kind of political instability that's going on in their environment. So we have some of the graphic artists that we featured on our site that were talking about, the Egyptian revolution and the Libyan revolution, also occupying Nigeria, and we wanted to discuss and open up how we've seen social media and new media influence the way Africans, which is hard for me to say because there's so many different people, are talking about their experiences. So I don't know if anyone would like to just show.
Do you think that I'm from South Africa, in Johannesburg, and I run between 10 and 5, which is like the South African version of African digital art. What I kind of experience a lot is that there's a lot of chatter amongst the African continent and in South Africa, for example, but it doesn't really get put out there. It doesn't really reach an audience further than the African audience. So take an example of the Joseph Kony video, the Kony 2012 video, right? Why wasn't there an African video that was produced for that cause? And don't you think that video actually did more harm to Uganda now, to the tourist industry, because now, Uganda is fucked. Joseph Kony's running the place. Meanwhile, I've been to Uganda. It's awesome.
Right.
It's not that hectic,
Right.
There aren't rebel kids running around trying to shoot everyone around every second corner. That's not how it works there. But now, a video like that, which was produced in the West, suddenly reframes Africa again as to be this war-torn country, because Africa's a country, right? So don't you think that an external voice like that, like the Invisible Children guys coming from the West and then saying, that reaches a further audience, and the African audiences never really get to reach the West. So we kind of talk amongst each other a lot, and we're reframing our own ideas a lot. And yes, we're positive and we're awesome, but it never really reaches the Western audience. And the Western audience, even though we do have lots of media, we have lots of digital new media, it doesn't reach the other guys who want to change perception.
I would say that you were absolutely right before, but then now this has changed. For example, one of the most exciting things about new media and social media, being online, being on Facebook and Twitter, is that before we used to see a lot of campaigns. For example, Justin Timberlake wants to sell T-shirts from mosquito nets, or for example, the Kony video that you're talking about. There was no really medium for people who were from Uganda to respond. They didn't really know what the conversation was, and they were kind of confused that, oh, George Clooney's here to speak. Okay, who's this guy? They don't really have the outlet to discuss exactly to share their part of the story. But I think that now there's been an enormous response against, for example, the Kony video, where you're seeing, but you're right that it's mainly people who have access to social media, for example, bloggers and people on Twitter, who are speaking out against,
So do you think it's the African diaspora that then basically runs that conversation, and it's the guys who are from Africa who have gone to the West or different places, different Western countries, and are columnists for the New York Times and the Guardian and the Huffington Post and so on? They can then, it's kind of their job or their imperative to reframe that conversation.
I think we can do, I think we could probably do a better job because we're creating content, so it's out there. but then you taking it a step forward in promoting your content. Because of course, naturally you share with your peers. So everybody who is in the know or within that circle are very aware of what's going on. But I think, you know, as we know with like media, everybody's gonna tell a story that reflects their perspective. So whether you're from The Economist or the New York Times, you're telling a story that reflects your perspective, and your perspective is, because you're not familiar with all this other stuff happening, is this is the view of Africa that I know, so this is the story I keep telling. But I think if we get better at kind of reaching out to just the way of somebody, it's almost like a marketing campaign, you know, and it sounds like very like capitalist in a certain kind of way, but a marketing campaign, like there needs to be somebody that says, okay, you've decided that there's a new image of Africa we want to be seen, and we need to target these editors and show them the image, because they don't know, and I think a lot of times people just want to do work and do what's easiest for you. I know, I already kind of know a story, I'm going with that. So I think if we go out there and begin to say, hey, well, I have these stories I want to pitch to you. I have these images. Let me show you these, you know, these video clips and give you another idea. Because I think you will find occasionally, you will see like the New York Times or The Economist do these alternate stories that are like, oh wow, I didn't even know that was happening. We need more of those stories to happen. We need more people who have a different perspective to be staff writers, you know, at these different publications.
But you're absolutely right that, you know, initially, and I think that's changing, initially the voices that are being heard are from the diaspora, because I think that they have been the bridge between people at home and people abroad. And also people from diaspora have actually more access in terms of like resources to actually speak and blog and discuss things. And I was actually telling her about my experience being from East Africa, and I know this is kind of different from being from West Africa, is that when we're in East Africa, not many people actually go to shows that are done by Kenyans. You know, they're more interested in the newest, latest, you know, person from the United States coming to Kenya than they are with Kenyan artists. And then it's only after people go abroad that they start actually appreciate. For example, like I have never started wearing more African clothing until I moved to the United States, because you start having an appreciation for where you're from, and you know, like you trying to bring back kind of the resources that you've learned and gained from being abroad back home, and also seeing what people have, how they're going to use that in their own way, unique way. So I think that you know, the people who are speaking out against the Coney videos are primarily people from the diaspora. But I think with now this explosion of access to the internet, you have people now, you know, at home in different parts that are not even urban centers saying, why is everybody on my Facebook wall talking about Coney in 2012, you know, where that didn't really necessarily exist. So I think that those are the things that are changing, and you've seen now with the revolutions that now you're having artists actually say, you know what, I'm actually in Lagos, I'm going to protest tomorrow. I happen to be a photographer, and now, you know, now that I have internet access, I can post, you know, my photos on Facebook, and you have access that people never had that before. So does that kind of answer your comment?
It's also a process of, it has to be, the challenge has to be approached on a number of different fronts. You know, as you're talking about these social networking tools and environments enabling a greater degree of participation in the past, but part of what he's addressing has to do with news judgment, particularly in the mainstream media, and the lack of diversity in the newsroom, and the editorial policy boards where the framework of the discussion per whichever medium you're talking about, like you're saying, if you're the Economist, you have a certain style and agenda, and it's different from the New York Times, it's different from the Washington Post. So the lack of newsroom diversity that has occurred over the last few years is something that needs to be addressed too, from the standpoint of feeding more diverse people into those roles and making the awareness of the availability of those roles, like some youth and media organizations are doing. And it's also about ownership as well. I happen to own, like, the oldest country western station in Texas I own. And one of the reasons that encouraged me to get into ownership of broadcast had to do with the fact that there was a lack of African Americans who control airspace. And the news is being broadcast to people in a particular environment. So it's people in the diaspora reacting to things, and as you know, a lot of the, say for example in Uganda, the 3 most popular radio stations, a significant portion of their online listenership are people who are are in the diaspora. They live in the UK, they live in France, they live in the US, and those are also people pumping money back into the economy. So I think it's going to have to come from mobilizing folks in all those arenas, and artwork in particular. Like with Libya, there was one English newspaper, it's called the Tripoli Post, before Gaddafi, before the fall of the Gaddafi regime. Since that time, 150 new newspapers have emerged. 150 new newspapers within a span of months. So that really shows you how people are really seeking to express themselves and want to have a say-so in their own destiny. All 150 are not going to stay in business, but it really shows you this new mode of engagement that people have in wanting to have a say-so and being empowered by social media tools, for example.
And I think I also wanted to ask, we have a couple people who are content creators and actually blog about Africa. And it just made me think that when I initially started African digital art, the majority of images that I got were of, photographers taking pictures, like people in either hunger or famine, war, strife. And my challenge to myself was to kind of try to find a different version or different way of understanding, the situations that were going on. And it was kind of this conscious editing of, just what the typical images of Africa is, like what's exactly going on in Libya, and I tried to show actually daily life in Libya, not necessarily people on the street, fighting in Libya, but more like the typical general, person and what they're going through. And I wanted to ask and pose that question about people who actually create content for Africa, if they have that kind of experience. I don't know, she's from Africa is not a country, right? Africa is a country, sorry. No?
Yeah, I'm here representing Africa as a country. It's a blog about actually this reframing Africa. I don't know if you know it, but I would like to share something on this topic because I'm originally from Denmark, but I traveled a lot to Sierra Leone in West Africa, and I think it's kind of hard because it's also about balance it because it's I think I really love hearing positive stories from Africa and about all this creative stuff going on, but I think there's also like there are like also bad things going on in Africa still, so we have to tell both kind of stories. And also the thing about having access, because in Sierra Leone I work in Kono, which is like a province a day travel away from the capital, and they don't have access at all. I mean, to internet, for example, there's no public internet cafes, and if there was, so a lot of the people couldn't afford to go there. But I was there last time in the fall of 2011, and I brought cameras like this, and I held like a video workshop for a group of women and taught them how to use them. And they created their own documentaries about their lives. And I think sometimes it's also about giving people access and the possibility to create something themselves. And these 14 women created their own documentary films, which were shown in the local community and were debated, and like created a lot of, a lot of people start talking about this, and also the fact that women were actually creating films, because that's in Sierra Leone, or like in Kono, if someone has a camera, it would usually be a man. And then, yeah,
I think that the question about this is really, really important, because I want to build an anecdote of a project when I was in India where this guy started a social enterprise where he
gives really low-end mobile phones, gives them to these kids who live in this really low-income area in India, and their job is to run around their little city all day, knocking on people's doors and asking them if they have anything that they want to send to the rest of the community, and typing this information into their cell phones and sending it as a text message to a hub that he has created, and that's how they make money. He pays them a little money, and they go and collect news and information, local, grassroots level news and information from the entire community, and they're in real time inputting it to a central hub that he has created, and is curating this information and sending it back into the community as locally generated news for that environment. And it's so relevant because the technology is so low end, right? But think about how you build another layer on top of that. Not only are you syndicating it out to that region, but do that in multiple areas, which is what his plan is, and then syndicate it into a higher level where it's platform agnostic. You can access it from your Nokia 3310 that only has 2 lines of text, but there's also an online version where people who are outside and have access to higher technology can get that level of local news, and then build another layer on top of that with what you were mentioning, the diaspora as local ambassadors in the communities that they are. Because you will need ambassadors to push this information out. The key is to build that pipeline that is easy and that is relevant and that is real at the grassroots level, and make it accessible at each level of the chain. And then eventually we will have the formalized, image creation entities in each of these African countries and as a continent as a whole, that will be like, we really need to control what the image of our continent is like, but they will always lag, and I never think about them. But options like that create access using low-level technology, but also make it scale onto different levels, so that if you have African digital art and you can bring in pictures, you can incorporate some of that grassroots information into it, and creating this fluidity that is completely platform agnostic is the space for creativity. You get people out in, they probably don't have a camera, but I bet you they have a cell phone, right?
Some of them.
Yeah, some of them. And for a lot of these communities, it'll be one cell phone that's charged by a solar panel, But in those communities, it is not necessary for everybody to have a cell phone. When it becomes necessary for them, they will acquire that technology. But all you need is that one. All you need is that one, and a place for people to at least know, if I have something to say, at least even to my local community, I have a way to get it to them. And so I definitely agree with what you're saying. Access is really important. Thinking about it beyond just cyber cafes, thinking about it at a very low level.
I was at a talk yesterday on RFID and NFC technology in the retail environment, and how these things will suddenly revolutionize the retail environment. And a lot of the discussion that what came up is that that's a future technology. Sure, it's being implemented in a couple of instances and it's being used at the moment, but it's a future technology. We shouldn't be focusing on that. And in the same way, like QR codes are not things that general people use. They don't get it. They don't understand what the little barcode thing is. And why would you do that when you could just have the URL? You could have an SMS input form to get that same data that you want to have. And I think our reliance on always thinking, there's gonna, the 10D is gonna come, or the 5D is gonna come out, and everyone's gonna have that, and that is going to revolutionize content creation in Africa. Once everyone has a 5D, it's gonna be amazing. There are guys solving problems with technology that they already have. You could buy, I heard an example, you could buy your car insurance with an SMS. I mean, that's solving a problem with a technology that's really low key. Guys are talking about mobile payments, and mobile payments are this weird thing for Americans. It's like, have you guys heard of M-Pesa? It works. It's been solved, guys. So there are instances where you don't have to rely on, we're going to get this camera, it's going to save our life. It's not necessarily the case. There are tools already available that you can use to solve those problems that you have already.
If you just talking about here in South Southwest, I don't know, every time I come, I feel like I can't get online, the internet's so slow, there are too many people here, it's just the speed is slow, the phone is not everything. And I was telling Jepchumba and telling other people, I'm like, when I go home, everybody can just buy a little, you know, a thumb drive, and the internet's right there for you. And you can do it, you can get it just for a month, you can get it for 2 weeks, you plug it in, you take it everywhere, and you just have the internet. And I'm like, you can't do that here, you have to get like a month-to-month plan, it's not that easy, but you know, if you have a laptop and you want to have the internet, you can have it for a week, you can have it for a couple of days, you just pay a certain fee. And like you said, it's just like solving these problems, and it's the simplicity of it, and then here we are in the West, and things seem so complicated to do.
In Weru in Zimbabwe, my friends in America are saying we should bring them iPads, and they could have tablets. And I said, they don't have power or running water or a toilet. So after we put the toilet in, we said, well, what can we get them that's a tablet? So we got them Speak and Spells. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember Speak and Spells, but Speak and Spells are the original tablet, and they run for a month on a AA battery. And that's amazing. And that can be 400 kilometers outside. So that is literally a 35-year-old piece of hardware. And it is indestructible and lasts for months. But we don't make that stuff because, you know, if I drop this, it's over. So why aren't we making more technologies like that will last for months on a single AA battery? And I think another thing to mention is that there's a project called the Kamusi project that my friend Martin runs. And the idea that someone who doesn't have a fluency in English could then query the internet by texting off an English word and getting this Swahili example makes them feel like I have access to the internet even though it's just SMS codes.
Mary?
I had a question, just like a quick, I'm proud of you, sorry. What are the top 5, I mean, in terms of knowing that mobile's really, really big in certain parts of Africa, within West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, there's different mobile technology partners that are doing really well. Is there a certain basis or a demographic study of what, I know you said people are using Bluetooth to exchange music or stuff like that, but has there been a real study on how that technology or how that pathway of wireless connections being used across regions or across different parts of Africa, not just as a whole? Is there some type of behavior science or audience study that you can relate to what's happening, let's say, culturally or statewide that relates to the usage of data?
You're not going to find data about this around Africa that's comprehensive as a continent as a whole. And Africa is definitely not a country from my perspective, a very different view. But so you can get better data. I think there's not great data, but there's, Nielsen actually just released some very recent stuff about South Africa comparing, mobile consumption, internet consumption in general versus television and all of this. And I think some of the key things that are coming out is that mobile, in terms of consumption of mobile media and things beyond SMS and voice, is very much, 30% of consumption of media, right? It's surpassing television in a lot of markets, surpassing radio in a lot of markets, which is also surprising. So that's some of the data that's coming out, but kind of drilling into what exactly people are doing on mobile. A lot of stuff on entertainment, social networking, kind of the basic stuff that people are doing in the West, nothing majorly surprising.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't know if there was an infographic that was going around the web in January that was put together by Portland Communications and Sweetminster, and it looked at it was something like 11 million tweets over a 3-month period on the continent, and it looked at geolocation, and it showed concentrations, and they had Africa. I mean, South Africa had the largest amount of tweets in that 3-month period. Right. And they had and I think the top 5 might have been South Africa, Kenya, Mozambique, Nigeria, and there was a 5th one I don't remember. And they did come across certain things, they saw that most people who were tweeting, and of course this is, it's not 100% accurate, but they were between the ages of 20 and 29 years old. They were talking about kind of a lot of things that were culturally relevant to kind of their age, kind of like what young people talk about here on Twitter, right? Things that are very culturally relevant. A couple of the other things, what were some other things that were, I'm gonna look at my that on here. But yeah, but I thought it was really, I thought the infographic was interesting because it showed this kind of concentration and where are people tweeting the most and what are they talking about, and looking at the age range and it correlating, like Africa has like the largest like youth population than, you know, a lot of other places, and to see that, okay, well, these are most of the people who are using Twitter, and then what would it be like on Facebook, and like what other content are they creating. So that was Portland Communications and Tweetmister, they did, you can research it, there's a lot of others.
How to monetize this form of creativity, and how to encourage artists to actually think this is a viable economy and to make money. Because talking about like the gentleman behind was talking about how people are coming across like basic problems of running water and being able to access, you know, their local hospitals. Like where's the potential for not only using this technology to think beyond just, you know, sustaining, you know, livelihood to, I mean, just like for, you know, for what was like how to use this form of technology not only for, you know, things like basic health care, basic running water, but actually use it as a way to tell stories and communicate, and how can we monetize this and give creative people an opportunities to make money from this, and also access like a very thriving African diasporan community that is willing to shell out, you know, money and shell out resources for these African creatives. So I just wanted to see if anyone had anything to say.
I think one of the important things is, I guess, the communities around them to actually take creative art seriously. Because I think, like for me, I'm a graphic designer, and I still to today get, oh, you're an artist. They don't take it seriously as something you can actually make money from. So I think we teach the community that art is as important as, I don't know, maybe not. It's not being a doctor or a lawyer, but art is, people kind of take art for granted and creative arts for granted. So I think once that's kind of instilled in those communities, then they might be more encouraged to give other artists opportunities so they can monetize from it.
And I think going back to when you were talking about the creative economy, like the UN did an actual study, like in terms of like industries, like and this study was for 2011, but they looked at 2010, and the creative economy was the only where they saw like economic growth. Like other industries were like shrinking, but the creative economy is where all the growth was. So like the idea you're saying, like people are like, well, that's not real, like creating art's not real, making films are not real. That's where the growth is, like right now. And the UN basically is trying to see like, oh, okay, well, if that's where growth is, maybe that's an opportunity for emerging economies. Like maybe that's the way to. So I think, yeah, that's also interesting. And then the whole thing with the diaspora, like I always think about it, the sheer numbers, there are so many people within these countries in Africa. That's an opportunity. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, well, maybe it has to come from outside. And I'm like, no, it actually doesn't. You know, in Nigeria, we're talking about over 140 million people, and a lot of them have mobile phones. There are lots of things that you can do and create where like, and generate economic revenue out of that. So I think sometimes we have to kind of look locally, like what are the needs locally that we can provide, and that's the economic opportunity.
But
right
like,
there.
and realistically, like one of the conversations we're having is like, if you're an artist from like Nigeria or somewhere else, and you want to put your album on iTunes, but your country's banned by PayPal, like how do you connect to these resources? Like how do you figure a way to actually monetize, you know, your
But I think they're doing it. Like now, like in Nigeria, there's a platform they're trying to launch called Spinlet, and it's going to be the iTunes for Africa. So basically, artists will you join the platform, and it's shared revenue, and it's 30-70. So Spinlet will get 30%, the artist gets 70%, and it's legal. The artist signs a contract, gives them the music, it's sold, and the music is sold really cheaply, but the sheer number of people. So I think they saw an opportunity, like, okay, everybody might not be able to buy an album for $10. What if we're selling music, and they're going to be selling music for like 50 cents? What if we sell it for 50 cents and 30 million people buy it? you're able to make money. And I think it's people thinking locally and solving problems locally. And I think that's often an issue. I think a lot of times people outside are like, I know how you can do this. This is how you can solve it. And I think people right there know what their issues are, and they just maybe need a couple of more tools, and they can figure it out. So I think it's happening a lot. We just don't necessarily know about it.
Okay, can I make a comment here? I think it's a really great question. I think that I spent a lot of time working in media and technology in Africa for most of my career, and I think the question around how do you really monetize content, right, is a really big and important question. I think there's a number of ways that people are looking at it, from ad-supported things to ad networks or direct sales from that side. If it's not the kind of content you want to be kind of ad-supported and looking at payment, yeah, there are a lot of complexities that come around that. I don't know if you guys talked earlier about Nollywood Love, the YouTube channel. You did, okay. So I think that when you look at, you're rightly on point in terms of what Slim's doing and some other local services is around, it's not that you don't have PayPal, it's something you can do, right? So in Kenya, people are leveraging M-Pesa, even though it's not seamless with online payments. You're looking at airtime billing, through operator billing for a lot of mobile services. That's where a lot of digital content's actually being sold. A lot of the structures of those are not so much in favor of content owners, though, in terms of rev share structures. But there is a lot happening in this space that is driving to how do we actually provide local content services and products for the local market, much more so than I think the external market of the diaspora. And I think things like Nollywood Love are an interesting blend where you're actually monetizing the diaspora who actually do have good bandwidth. We talk about how many Nigerians actually have mobile web access, right? How good is it? 3G networks are just coming to Nigeria now, right? So it's not really viable to have ad-based platform around YouTube in Nigeria to the extent of how you can monetize the diaspora, right? So I think it is a really interesting time as content owners are kind of grappling with this, but I think that it's not that there aren't tools there and tools that are being developed and forms of payment that are being innovated on. There's a lot happening across a lot of the key markets. So it's a really important question.
And I just wanted to go back to the point about feelings, though. One of the biggest challenges to convince people when you're, especially I can speak from my experience in Kenya, to rally a group of people to come to see your exhibition if you're in Kenya are just people who end up attending your events are people from outside of Kenya who actually take interest. The people who are actually purchasing local content are people who aren't really necessarily local, but for example, in Nairobi, there's been a mandate by the government that 40% of television content has to be local content, which is quite scary for people in Nairobi, because most of the things that we watch are Nigerian movies and Spanish soap operas. So it's like, and now you're talking about people who are exposed to a Kanye West video who now have to try to watch something made on a shoestring budget in Kenya. So that's when you were saying people try to rise up to that international level standard, but then still represent who they are and where they're from, and also trying to figure out exactly how to pitch their ideas to advertisers and actually make deals and actually make sure that they're paid for their content. And actually, this is actually a problem that you see in the United States. Artists now are scrambling to figure out ways to monetize their albums when it's so easy here to just download music illegally. In Nairobi, in Nigeria, it's so easy to go on the street and get a DVD bootleg of your favorite show. So yeah.
I'm from Sweden. I don't know if you heard of the music service called Spotify.
Yes.
Yeah. See, I think the founder there, he's right at heart because he's refusing to sell to the big companies because he really wants to do right by the artists. So I think if you can't get it out of Africa, you need to find somebody to take it outside. You need to go and try and get it sold. Because I used to be an innovations advisor in Sweden. And it's like every artist needs to start looking at them as it sells, they're selling a product. So everything has a price, and that's really tough sometimes for artists to do that. To actually be able to put a label, this is what it's worth. So they're not just giving it away. It's about, actually saying this is $10 or this is 50 cents, but there's a price tag on everything. And the sooner you start, the better, because then it's worth something. it's a professional business when you're not an artist anymore if you're like make sure that you're getting paid for your talent. So.
But I think that's what new media, like, I think that's what new media is doing. Like, it's creating this larger interest. Like, you can look at Louis Vuitton. They just had a runway show, and everything was like Maasai, and you know, and the world is like, wait, what is that? That's okay. Where do you get that from? You get that in Kenya, like, and I think now you have all these, even Burberry, like they have
Donna Karan.
Yeah, like everybody's using batik. There's all this interest in like this African aesthetic. You know, and you know, some people are like, you know, well, it's misappropriation, it's not fair. But I do think it's creating this excitement around Africa, and it's a big opportunity for people who are there to leverage that, because people are interested and they want to know more. And you're right there, and you have the ability to create, to provide them with the information they're looking for already, because it's obvious there's all this interest. So I think there's big opportunities, and you know, us helping them leverage it, so they, you know, at the end of the day, you know, people on the continent and the diaspora really are the ones that benefit, because a lot of times we see that they don't benefit and somebody else is. So if anything else, I think a lot of the work that we both do is like, we want to make sure that the people who are creating this stuff are the people who get the benefit from it.